Rogan is number 1. From Darwin, the latest from our daily newsletter at podnews.net. The Edison Research Podcast Consumer Tracking Report has a new name, Edison Podcast Metrics. The company has released the top 50 most listened to podcasts in the US over the last 12 months. Rogan is number 1 and has increased his listenership, the company says. Dateline NBC and The Ben Shapiro Show are new entries to the top 10. The Daily has slipped a place to number 3. The data is unique in including all available podcasts. Edison Research has also released the top US podcast genres for Q1 22. Comedy is number 1, true crime is number 3, government is least popular on the chart at number 19. Who'd have thought? The largest podcast publisher in the US, SXM Media, released the the 2022 Podcast Trends Report. It looks at listeners, creators and advertisers. Doctors were the most targeted contextual audience, the report reveals. CBC has launched the CBC True Crime subscription podcast channel. International listeners can pay to listen ad-free. It's on Apple Podcasts. Podfest Africa and Baraza Media Lab have released their report on African podcasting, an 83-page document. It notes that most listeners stream rather than download, and there are big differences in African nations between use of mobile data and Wi-Fi. Spotify is most used by 35%, Apple by 18%, and Google Podcasts, interestingly, 15%. Third Coast has unveiled a year-round program of content over the next 12 months. The organisation is rebuilding and will open their Third Coast competition entries in Q3. Podsites unveiled an easier way for new users to install the Podsites Pixel. The Pixel helps the company match people who've listened to an ad on a podcast to people who visited a website or purchased a product. And finally, the next version of macOS adds an auto-delete function to Apple Podcasts. And in People News, seemingly this is a Spotify special. Podcast's Matt Cutler is being promoted to Head of Talk Creator Content and Partnerships at Spotify, a similar role by name as Michael Mignano recently had. His title on LinkedIn, though, is Head of New Content Initiative, so who knows what's going on. Anyway, Spotify wants to increase the overall number of creators from 11 million to 50 million, according to Deadline. Bill Simmons is being promoted to Global Head of Sports Content at Spotify, retaining his role as MD at The Ringer. Matt Lieber, Gimlet's co-founder, is to leave the company this summer, says Bloomberg. And Julie McNamara is to manage Spotify's 3 studios, The Ringer, Gimlet Media and Parcast, and some high-profile partnerships. And in podcast news, PodChat has Elsie Escobar as a guest in its latest episode on why we need diversity at board level to help advertisers and investors understand how to really connect with diverse voices. The award-winning Shelter in Place is its episode 200, and they announce a new name and a new direction in a final episode. The children's podcast network Fun Kids has launched a 12-part true crime fiction series called Truth Diggers. It follows school friends Morgana and Alfie looking into a notorious cold case, the mysterious disappearance of local eccentric Odd Colin from their Lancashire town in 1972, and they've decided to make a podcast about it. And The Paycheck returns for a 4th season today. The season looks at how the pandemic created a global economic crisis that economists and experts expected would lead to greater wealth inequality than ever before. But that's not exactly how things have played out. It's hosted by Rebecca Greenfield. And that's the latest from our newsletter. To read all the stories and subscribe, we're at podnews.net.